All right. Hopefully you've written down what your answers are to these questions. Let's go over my answers. A metaphor is an application of a name or descriptive term to an object to which it is not literally applicable. So another way of understanding this is it's understanding something in terms of something else. For example, you can have a list metaphor. This is where you have a set of contact information in a list. Or in a Rolodex, you have these different cards that you can kind of flip through in an old school Rolodex style interaction, and that's a metaphor. If someone knows a Rolodex, they know how to interact with it. Or cards, right? If we've interacted with physical cards, as many of us have, we know how to interact with these icons that look like cards. And you know that you can drag them around. If you click on a deck, then it'll flip the top one up, etc. So these actions all make sense to us because we've interacted with something similar. In this case, direct manipulation is a very powerful metaphor. It's an interface that behaves as though the interaction was with a real-world object rather than an abstract system. And because we all exist in the real world, then we know how to interact with various physical objects, and this can transfer over to digital design. This is where we get things like the desktop metaphor, which is a set of unifying concepts based on a desk environment used by graphical user interfaces to help users interact more easily with the computer. Back in the day, this was very valuable because everyone worked in these office environments and had desks, and you have these file folders and files that you can manipulate. This is an example of the Xerox star pioneered in the early 80s. Some classic GUI concepts that you may know. A GUI is a graphical user interface. WYSIWYG is what you see is what you get for editing, for example. And WIMP is very common. Windows Icons Menu Pointer. And it's a conceptual model that combines these different concepts as well as others into an interaction paradigm. And this has been really valuable for allowing people to originally use computers when they weren't familiar with how to use them, and now has become a cohesive set of interaction principles that mean that you can go access pretty much any desktop environment, any laptop or any computer these days, any personal computer, and interact with it in a way that makes sense. But there are drawbacks. What are some of the disadvantages of direct manipulation? Well, it's ill-suited for abstract operations. A spell checker, there's no physical spell checker unless you imagine some sort of writing assistant that's going to edit your copy. Manually searching a large database is really, really difficult, but writing a query for a structured database is a little bit more simple, right? You know how to have things like wildcards, you know how to have matching different types of patterns, and being able to write that or articulate that in a language or a code makes it a lot more clear. The task domain may not have adequate physical or visual metaphors, and so you may need to use some other type of metaphor or just create your own concepts and articulate that through some sort of smart tutorial. Or the metaphor may be overly restrictive. Remember, if a metaphor helps you get going on a system because you understand in terms of something else, but if that's not a good fit, there may be other things that you can do in this system that you couldn't do with the introductory metaphor, and that can restrict how effective metaphors are. So what can we do if the metaphor fails or is incomplete? Well, the user can learn the mental model through interaction. So let's talk about Norman's action cycle, which is a way of being principled about this interaction with a system to update your mental model. We'll hear from Don Norman again.
The action cycle is an extremely important concept, essential for design. It's important to be understood, so let me illustrate it. Suppose I'm reading a book and decide that there really isn't enough light here to read this book easily, so what I would like to do is get more light on my book. So you see what I've done is I evaluated the state of the world, interpreted it, and said, there's not enough light. I set up a goal, a new goal, to get more light in this book. Having done that, I now have to say, how can I go about doing that? So I make an intention to do an action. I look around and I see that, yes, here's a light. I could turn this light on and get more light. So my intention to act is now to turn this light on. I now must determine the actual motion I must do, how I can move my hand over to the light switch and turn the light on. So in this intention, in this action cycle, what I must do is go from the stated goal to an intention to act, and then to the actual execution of the action. Now, when I execute the act, it has some impact on the real world. And I can see the light is on. But if I now evaluate, I can see the light is on, but when I interpret it and evaluate the result, I see that I still haven't gotten more light on my book. My goal is unchanged, to get more light onto this book. And so I must redo the intention to act. The light's over there, the book's over here. So I decide that the proper action is to put my hand here and move it over. Now note that this had an impact on the world. I now have more light on the book. I can perceive that difference, interpret it, evaluate it as successful completion of my need. My goal is satisfied and I can stop. There's 7 different stages of action there. Each of those 7 stages is important. We have to design to put in important, useful information to help the person do each of the 7 stages. One of the most critical that's often forgotten is the feedback. When I do an action like turning on a light, I want to see the results immediately. If I don't see a result of the action, I don't know that it's being done right. The action cycle is critical to our understanding of design.
So there are 2 different gulfs in interaction design. There's the gulf of execution, which is the difference between the intentions of the users and what the system allows them to do, or how well the system supports those actions. And there's the gulf of evaluation, the amount of effort a person must exert to interpret the physical state of the system, how well expectations and intentions have been met. And we want small gulfs. We want to build bridges over these gulfs, or however you want to extend the metaphor. We don't want these gulfs to become a barrier for people to interact with the system. Here's a visual representation of it. You have a goal that you want to achieve, that you interact with the world, and then you need to figure out what happened when you start to make actions. So for the gulf of execution, you try and figure out, how do I work this? What can I do? And then the gulf of evaluation is what just happened whenever you take an action, and is this what I wanted? And we can build these bridges to try and get across these gulfs. For the bridge of execution, you can plan, specify, and perform an action that will be something you send out to the world, and then there will be a reaction in the world, and you'll perceive, interpret, and then compare that to what your original goal was. And this is a way to formalize how we interact with the system. Again, all of this is in the context of an interactive system or interacting with an environment. And as we interact, we either, we make actions, and then the world responds possibly with actions, and that's how it's interactive. So for execution, there are 3 stages. You start with a goal, you translate it into an intention, and then you translate that into a sequence of actions. Then the actions take place. And then there's the evaluation, which has 3 stages again. You perceive the world, interpret what was perceived. So something happens, you notice it, you interpret that, and then you compare it with respect to the original intentions. And so using this framework, often in an in-person class, we would go through an example of how to break down an action into these different steps, and it helps you think about how you might be able to make it clearer what people can do with the system, or giving better feedback. So remember way at the beginning of the class when we talked about interaction design principles? This is a way of really getting specific and concrete to how you can think about those and use them to frame an interaction. And if something's just not working, you can try and put it into this framework to try and understand how we can improve it. So the key takeaways from this lesson are: there is an important vocabulary around interaction design. Things like affordances, mappings, conceptual models, etc. are all terms that are commonly used when describing interfaces and interaction design. And so I want you to be familiar with these terms. Metaphors are very useful tools. They have shaped out how many of the ways our systems are designed, and so they've been very valuable there. They help people learn and use interfaces, but they can have limitations. And to overcome those limitations, people have to be able to interact with the system and update their mental models. So be able to use these concepts in interaction design. That's it for now. I'll see you next time.